Hello everyone, and welcome to, finally, at last, the third and final installment of the Draco trilogy by Cassandra Clare, Draco Veritas. Now, this particular document I had to actually split into two separate documents because it is so incredibly lengthy. I do believe that the original version was something like 1,700 pages. And in my editing process, I have edited around 300 of those pages out. But I might be mistaken in that counting. I might have to redo the math again and then I will update everybody. But yes, this is it, chapter 1. And I do believe there is a little bit of a disclaimer. Some PG-13 stuff happens in here. So, if slightly suggestive encounters bother you, it might be a good idea to sit this one out. But without further ado, guys, let us just get right into it. Disclaimer. This story is based on characters and situations created and owned by J.K. Rowling. Various publishers, including but not limited to Bloomsbury Books, Scholastic Books, Raincoat Books, and Warner Brothers, Inc. No money is being made and no copyright or trademark infringement is intended. This work contains quotes from various books, films, TV shows, and movies, including, but not limited to, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, obscure British comedies, and Milton. The quotes are footnoted at the end of each chapter, but if you note anything I've missed, drop me a line and I'll add it. Author's notes. This fanfiction is an AU, alternate universe. It was written in the year following Goblet of Fire and does not incorporate material from OOTP, HBP, or J.K. Rowling's fan site, all of which post-dated. It presents a universe in which Sirius is still alive, and so is Dumbledore. Luna Lovegood does not exist. Blaise Zabini is a girl. Ginny's full name is Virginia, and so on. Elizabeth Thomas is named in honor of our beloved Ebony. Malcolm Baddock, Millicent Bulstrode, Blaise Zabini, and Graham Pritchard are all Slytherins in canon, and Dex Flint is obviously Marcus Flint's younger brother. The unpleasant Tess Hammond is a creature of my own imagination. The idea that the Slytherin dungeon is built into a cliff is from Stacy. The Night, Death, and the Devil is a wood-cut engraving by Albert Dürer. It shows a knight making his progress through the world, frightened by death, tempted by the devil. Alternatively, I think of the knight as being Harry, death as Draco, and the devil as Lucius, offering temptation to our hero. The part about the Parkinsons buying their own furniture is, of course, something Draco's family would never do, having inherited the stuff down through the generations. MP Alan Clark once famously said about fellow politician Michael Heseltine that he was a man so unaristocratic that he had bought his own furniture. The first time I came across a reference to this expression was in Textual Sphinx's lovely fic to sever the lining from a cloud, and it has stuck in my head ever since. The description of the room in which Ron and the Dark Lord play chess is taken from T.S. Eliot's poem, A Game of Chess, part of The Waste Land. Credit for the evil little doorkeeper fairy goes to my recent reading material, more specifically Holly Black's Taif, which posits a lot of quite nasty little fairies indeed, along with some hunky fairy knights. Credit for the idea of the Flu Hub goes to Zaz's fantastic fanfic, Russian Roulette, used with her kind permission. Thanks to Kasakai, who gave me the title before Chapter 12 a long time ago, and thereby the name of the Midnight Club itself. Chapter 1. Through Silver and Glass. It was December, and it was freezing cold in the potions dungeon, but Snape didn't care. "Can anyone tell me what this is?" he demanded, holding up a transparent vial of steaming green liquid and surveying the class critically. "Longbottom." Neville, who had been trying in vain to warm his blue-tipped fingers over his cauldron, looked horrified.
"I don't know, Professor."
"Did you not complete your reading last night, Longbottom? The assignment was 10 pages in the Lieber and Stroller book."
"I know, Professor, but my toe, Trevor, went missing and I—"
"10 points from Gryffindor," barked Snape, who was in fine form. He didn't even look cold, Draco mused. Perhaps he'd mixed himself up a warming potion before class. Snape's ink-black eyes darted over the students. "Potter?" he inquired. Out of the corner of his eye, Draco saw Harry look startled. Next to him, Hermione went red. Every time she knew an answer that Harry didn't, Draco had the feeling that she might implode with the effort of trying to will the knowledge in Harry's direction.
"It's an imperceptible potion,"
Draco thought lazily at Harry.
"Makes you invisible."
Harry sat up straight. "An imperceptible potion," he said. "It makes the drinker invisible." Snape looked disappointed. "And the ingredients?" he snapped.
"Mugwort," Draco thought. "Crushed dragon bone, powdered asp's blood, tansy, peppermint."
"Mugwort," said Harry. "Crushed dragon bone, powdered asp's blood, tansy, peppermint—"
"And a pair of my very own boxer shorts, the ones with the little stitches on them,"
Draco added. "And a pair of—" Harry began and choked. His face went red and then white as he succumbed to a prolonged coughing fit. Hermione gazed at him in alarm. Draco looked innocently at his quill, twirling it in his fingers. Snape's eyebrows had shot up to his hairline. "Yes, Potter? A pair of what?" Harry was still coughing.
"Beetles?"
he suggested weakly. Snape looked annoyed. "No, Potter," he said. "The 6th ingredient is not a pair of beetles. However," he added, 5 out of 6 is not disgraceful. I will not take points from Gryffindor." He set the file down on the desk in front of him with a slight bang. "Now, I need a volunteer to come up here and be made invisible," he said. Draco looked over at Harry and grinned. "Never, ever help me again." And even Harry's telepathic voice sounded annoyed.
"Hey, Gryffindor didn't lose any points."
"No, but I think I lost 10 years off my life. Go be invisible or something, Malfoy. Then again, you'd probably drop dead if you had to spend 10 minutes without your own reflection." Draco shrugged modestly, then realized that Hermione was looking from him to Harry and back again. She bit her lip irritably and turned back to her notebook as Ron was called up to the front of the class to be made invisible. He looked suspiciously at the foaming green liquid and drank it with the air of someone about to be murdered. The sound of rustling parchment caught Draco's attention, and when he turned sideways he saw that Hermione was holding up a note, folded so that only he could read it. "I told you not to talk to Harry during class." Draco shrugged apologetically, but Hermione continued to glare at him until Ron distracted the entire class by glowing violently purple for a moment, then vanishing. "That's the best Weasley's ever looked," said a silky voice at Draco's elbow. It was Blaise Zabini. "Just what I was going to say," Draco replied quite truthfully. She laid 2 fingers on his sleeve and looked at him from beneath her long, dark eyelashes, her beautiful face lighting up. Her eyes were huge and gray-green. "Aren't you clever?" Draco smiled at her and sat back in his chair, vaguely conscious, without looking, that Hermione had shot him a disgusted look. something he was used to at this point. Ron had popped back into invisibility and made his way back to his desk, looking green. "Worse luck," Draco muttered towards Blaze, and she and Pansy Parkinson giggled. Hermione pulled Ron down into his seat by the sleeve and patted his shoulder. "Now, we have another potion," said Snape, indicating a stoppered vial of red liquid on his desk. "This one is called Suppulse. And it does what?" "Yes, Granger." Hermione put her hand down. "It makes you remember your dreams." Snape did not even bother telling the class that this was correct. "Very well." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Malfoy, come up here." Draco was surprised. The potions master rarely called on him for much of anything, preferring to torment the Gryffindors and slower Slytherins. He rose to his feet, however, and made his way up to the front of the room, where he stood looking inquiringly at Snape, who unstoppered the vial of scarlet liquid and handed it to Draco. It looked like blood. "This will make me remember my dreams?" Draco asked, looking at Snape suspiciously. "Just the most recent ones," Snape said, his expression quite blank. "Go on, then." Draco gave him one last suspicious look and drank the potion. For a moment, nothing happened, and he looked out at the class, who stared back at him expectantly. Hermione had her head to the side, looking curious. Ron looked as if he were hoping against hope that Draco might explode, and Harry had one eyebrow raised. Blaze and Pansy were staring with parted lips. Neville seemed sunk in gloomy ruminations about his toad. Draco was about to turn to the potions master and announce that nothing was happening, when he noticed that the back wall of the classroom seemed to be curling in on itself and rushing towards him like a wave. Blackness hit him, and he fell into it as if he were drowning. The dream rose like a fever, washed over him, blinding him, and carrying him forward. Stone walls rose up around him, and a floor of marble slid beneath his feet. He raised his head and glanced around at a place that was somewhere and nowhere by turns. It was as if he looked through a pane of black glass. The world before him seemed smoky, distant, touched with darkness, as if its light had been smothered under heavy cloth. He saw that he was in a cylindrical stone room with narrow ancient windows, as if he stood at the top of a tower. A long oak table ran across one wall, lined with bottles and silver vials, studded with what looked like costly gems. There were other items scattered there, a key made of bone, a hand of glory, and a wicked-looking dagger. A tapestry covered most of one wall, depicting a circle, quartered by a cross, and in each quarter of the cross was a symbol and a motto in Latin that Draco couldn't quite decipher, though he thought he recognized the word for worthy or honored. In the center of the room was a square table carved out of onyx. At each corner was a golden disc, and next to the table stood two men. The one on the right was immediately familiar, tall and pale-haired, with narrow, cold gray eyes, dressed in viridian robes. His black-gloved hands clasped across his front. Lucius Malfoy, his father. The other man was dressed in a black cloak. His hood was up, hiding his face, although in its depths Draco imagined he could see the flicker of two coal-like eyes. His right hand was bare, and Draco recognized the ghastly white skin. Once that hand had crushed his own until he screamed in agony. His left hand was covered in a scaled glove, like lizard skin that glittered with the dull sequins in the light. Something wriggled and twisted on that hand. A serpent. "I do miss my Nagini," the Dark Lord said. "There are
None like her anymore.
No, said Lucius quietly. Master, the matter I came to speak with you about, it remains unresolved. Voldemort let out a hissing breath.
The boy.
Lucius nodded. He is unreliable, Master.
It was your task, Lucius, said Voldemort, to see that he was not. You have been in contact, not just to tell him you are alive.
Yes. He is aware, although, of course, I have not told him everything.
Do whatever you have to do, Lucius. He is your responsibility.
The Dark Lord made a sudden movement, seizing the snake just below its head and squeezing tightly. When he released it, it lay limp, apparently dead. Lucius' expression darkened as Voldemort lifted the limp snake and dropped it into the cauldron.
You know what will happen if you do not succeed with this.
Lucius licked his dry lips.
Yes, Master, of course. And has Rookwood sent word?
He is still gathering materials, Master, said Lucius, speaking very quietly, so that Draco had to strain to hear. He has not yet returned from... But it was no use. The words vanished into nothingness, and the vision followed. The room shut like a flower, the cauldron and the jeweled vials and the two men whirling away from him on a current of darkness. Draco started upright, his heart racing and his eyes flying open to fix on Snape's face. The potions master was staring at him in what might have been consternation or concern. The room slowly swam into focus, and he realized that he must have reeled backward into the wall. His shoulder hurt, as if he had struck it hard, and his eyes burned. He could see the entire class staring at him in shock. Harry had half risen to his feet, and Hermione looked stricken with worry. "Did something happen?" Snape asked in a low voice, so only Draco could hear it. "Did you see something?" A tower, a serpent, a cauldron, Voldemort. Draco shook his head. "No, I just got dizzy." Snape's eyes narrowed. "You saw nothing?" Too late, Draco realized that he should have made something up. He should have said he dreamed he was a lemon floating in a giant gin and tonic. Anything. Silently, he shook his head. "No, nothing." "Very well," Snape said, and Draco could almost have sworn he looked disappointed. Worried, even. "Go back to your seat, Mr. Malfoy." "Another letter from Monique?" Ginny asked in a teasing voice, reaching over the table towards Ron, who was looking expectantly at the black owl perched on his left shoulder. Her name was Nefertiti, and she had been a gift from his parents when they had learned that he had been made head boy. Pigwidgeon had gone to Ginny. Now Nefertiti pecked at his ear and dropped a letter printed on lavish gold and white parchment and scented heavily with jasmine into his hands. Ron unrolled the paper and examined it with a grin. "What can I say?" he said. "Monique just can't get enough of me." "Oh, you're just stringing her along," said Ginny with a smile, reaching past Ron to get at the pumpkin juice. "You're not serious about her." "There are some aspects of this relationship I'm very serious about," Ron said gravely. "And she's got quite an agent provocateur supporting those aspects," said Ginny with an evil grin. "I think she's just after me for my money anyway," said Ron, who had set himself to the task of turning Monique's letter into a paper firebolt. "Did you see this?" Hermione interrupted, turning the page of her copy of the Daily Prophet, which her owl had just delivered. "Inquiry into Lucius Malfoy's death has been closed," she read out. "The Ministry has ruled the cause to have been suicide." Ron looked disgusted. "It took the Ministry 6 months to figure out that he topped himself. Geniuses. So he summed it up something nasty and it ate him.
he continued. "Maybe he did it on purpose. Who knows? Me, I feel sorry for the something nasty. Getting served Malfoy for lunch would make anyone mad enough to blow things up."
"Ron, be nice," admonished Hermione.
Ron looked staggered. "About Lucius Malfoy?"
"Well, just think how Draco must feel."
"Right," said Ron slowly. "Because you look so upset." Against her better judgment, Ginny looked over at the Slytherin table. As always, the action at the table revolved around Draco. No longer flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, who had left school after pulling only one owl each, he was bookended instead by Dex Flint, the Slytherin keeper, and Malcolm Baddock, a slender, dark-haired boy who had replaced Goyle as a chaser. He was leaning over Blaise Zabini, his chin on her brilliant red-gold hair, which spilled down over her shoulders. On a ribbon around her throat glittered an amulet in the shape of a silver snake, a gift from Draco. Vaguely, Ginny heard Hermione say defensively,
"Well, maybe he's hiding how unhappy he is."
Ginny sighed, and to distract herself glanced over at the staff table, and noticed that neither Snape nor Dumbledore were there. Her eyes fell instead on her brother, Charlie, who had recently accepted the job as the Care of Magical Creatures professor, and was now engaged in a lively conversation with Professor Lupin, using his fork to punctuate his remarks. The sight of him made her smile momentarily, before she turned back to the table.
"Don't we have practice now?"
she asked Harry absently. Harry looked over at her and smiled. "Yeah, we do," he said, and Ginny got to her feet. "I'll see you down there, then," she said, and left, but couldn't shake the feeling that Draco was watching her from across the room as she did so. Harry, Ron, and Hermione trooped down to where the rest of the teams waited at the entrance to the Quidditch pitch. Seamus, who had been made a chaser just that year, was already there, standing next to Ginny and the third chaser, Elizabeth Thomas, Dean's younger sister. A little ways away stood the Creevey brothers, who Hermione suspected had been made beaters primarily because they were brothers. Since Fred and George had departed, there seemed to have sprung up a certain superstition regarding the luckiness of having siblings take their place. They greeted Harry and the others with a cheerful waving of broomsticks. Hermione dropped back towards the stands, content to watch, her copy of Quidditch Through the Ages on hand in case Harry needed it for reference material. Not that he ever did. He had been nervous about being made team captain, but he needn't have been. As it turned out, he was as good at strategizing as he was at flying. Hermione suspected he kept an elaborate mental map of the Quidditch field in his head and referred to it at will. "All right," said Harry now, consulting some notes he had scribbled on a bit of parchment. "I think this time we should work on coordinating better and telegraphing our moves less. Seamus, you need to be quicker on the turns. Elizabeth, I've got an idea." "Actually, I've got an idea," interrupted a drawling voice. "Why don't you all just bugger off, since you've got no business being here in the first place?" It was Draco, of course, in green Quidditch robes, flanked by the rest of his team. Blaise Zabini, Malcolm Baddock, and Graham Pritchard, his chasers. Behind them, looking menacing, were the beaters, Tess Hammond and Millicent Bulstrode. Bringing up the rear was Dex Flint, a sharp-faced but handsome fifth-year who played as keeper. Draco reached out a lazy hand, took the parchment out of Harry's grip, looked at it with mild disinterest, and let it drop into the snow. "We have the Quidditch pitch booked for practice right now," he said, in a voice like syrup poured over broken glass. "I know you Gryffindors aren't the brightest lot, but I did at least think you could tell time properly." Harry didn't change expression. "We signed up for this practice last week," he replied flatly. "Go and check the book." "Yes, I saw that," said Draco, lazily twirling his broomstick. If he'd had a mustache, Hermione was sure he would have twirled that too. Madame Hooch's eyesight must be slipping a little, because she didn't even notice when I wrote right over your name. "You dishonest creep," said Elizabeth, her two pigtails trembling with rage. I'm a Slytherin, said Draco, giving her a smile that would have melted solid steel, although it didn't have much effect on Elizabeth. We prefer to call it cunning. That trick won't work more than once, Malfoy, said Harry, his green eyes narrowed. It only needs to work once. Draco shook his head. Sometimes I wonder about you, Potter. Where were you when they were handing out brains? I don't know, said Harry, his voice dripping acid. I'm afraid I accidentally got in line for shred of moral decency instead. It must have been quite a long line, said Draco. It made you late for good looks, fashion sense, and witty repartee. Oh yeah? Harry spat. How's this for witty repartee? And he drew back a fist and hit him. Draco staggered rather theatrically back into the arms of his teammates, then straightened up and started for Harry, rolling his sleeves up to the elbows as he went. Hermione closed her book and sighed, bored and irritated. Oh, for goodness sake, she thought, not this again. Some time later, Hermione was to be found holding a damp sponge in one hand and applying it to the corner of Harry's left eye, which had stopped bleeding several minutes ago. This is getting ridiculous, she said disapprovingly. It is really so important for you to keep pretending you hate each other? I mean, it's gotten to the point where not only will Madame Pomfrey not fix your battle scars, but she's even forbidden me to do it. Can't you at least not hit each other so hard? No, said both Harry and Draco in unison, then grinned. Draco slightly painfully due to the blue-black bruise rising on one cheekbone. They were sitting in an unused broom closet, which Hermione had taken to use as a makeshift infirmary. It was the only place that she could find where no one would discover them. After all, it wouldn't do for anyone to see her treating both Harry and Draco's wounds. There was a rap on the door, and then it opened, admitting Ron's bright red head. Success, he said as he slipped inside. Everyone believes the fight, and are all talking about it in hushed tones. That whole signing up for the same time for practice business worked really well. He jerked his chin at Harry. You better get back to the pitch, though. They're waiting for you. Be careful, though. Slytherins are all still lurking around, looking like they want to start a fight of their own. Draco looked pleased, as they should. Blaise Zabini looks particularly threatening, Ron added. Everyone looked at Draco, who cocked his eyes towards the ceiling, his expression neutral. Well, she is my girlfriend. Thanks for reminding us, said Harry. I think I might have otherwise missed the point when she threw herself at me screaming, You hit my boyfriend, I hate you. Yes, said Draco noncommittally, as everyone kept staring at him, and he continued to look expressionless. Nobody understood how he and Blaise had started dating, how serious they were, or in fact if he even liked her. Talking to Draco when he did not want to tell you something, Hermione reflected, was like trying to converse with a particularly uncommunicative wall. All right, said Harry finally, standing up. I guess we'd better get back. He nodded over at Draco. Next time you win. We have to keep it even. Right. Draco touched the tips of his fingers to his temple in a mock salute, and Harry headed for the door. Wait a second, said Hermione. Aren't you forgetting something? And she lifted up her face to be kissed. Oh, right, said Harry, and reached around her to grab his firebolt from where it leaned against the wall. Thanks, he said, and left, followed by Ron. Hermione stared after them in disbelief. She began, then her face crumpled. Throwing the blood-stained sponge she had been holding at the wall, she let out an undignified curse of frustration. Honestly! Draco ducked the sponge and came up looking sympathetic, or at least as sympathetic as he ever did, which meant that he wasn't smirking. He's still doing it? All the time, said Hermione, her face a mask of unhappiness. He just acts like I don't exist,
And when I try to talk to him about it, he says I'm imagining things and that he's busy. Her voice trailed off. I know he's busy, what with being Quidditch captain, and that's why he turned down being head boy, but... You're not imagining things, he said quietly. She looked at him and bit her lip. What is it? She said in a tiny voice. Is there somebody else? I doubt it. Then what? Her voice cracked. Can't you ask him? Draco looked down at his hands and then up at her, and she read the reply in his face. The desire to do this for her, the wish that she not be unhappy, the fear that whatever the answer was, it would hurt her, and the knowledge that however much she wanted it, he could no more extract information from an unsuspecting Harry than he could fly without a broomstick. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have asked. He loves you, said Draco, the look in his eyes distant. How do you know? She asked out loud. I think I would know if he stopped, said Draco simply. She remembered him at the manor then, reaching around her throat to fasten her necklace. I waited so long to hear you say that. If things were different. And shook her head to clear it. You're only thinking of these things because you're unhappy, she admonished herself mentally. And because Harry seems as cold and remote as a Durmstrang glacier. Then again, he continued, it's not in my nature to give advice to the lovelorn. Ask someone with a more successful romantic life. That's my suggestion. You've got a girlfriend, Hermione pointed out. So I do. Draco sat back, his mouth twisting into something that might have been a smile, or not. There was no one else in the Slytherin common room. They had all gone to dinner, but Draco was not feeling hungry. He had stayed behind, although the common area was hardly one of his favorite places. The long, low, underground room never seemed warm, not even when there was a blazing fire in the ornate marble fireplace, as there was now. The low-hanging greenish lamps cast a sickly sort of pallor over everything. Draco slumped deep into the forest green armchair he had pulled up to the fire, lost in thought. He was still disturbed by the vision of his father he had seen earlier that day during potions class, and was almost entirely sure it had not been an ordinary vision. He tried to imagine where his father and Voldemort might be, but there had been nothing specifically identifiable about the stone room. It could have been anywhere. His father's voice had been so familiar, the careless drawl that he had inherited. The boy is unreliable, master. Draco tipped his head back and looked at the ceiling, which was carved out of alternating strips of marble and green malachite. Stretching, he looked down at the Transfiguration book in his lap, but he was too tired to concentrate, and the words danced on the page. A sound of footsteps in the corridor caused him to look up, and the dungeon door swung open as students began to stream in, returning from dinner. He tensed, before remembering that Blaise had a study date with Pansy in the library. Good. He wasn't up to dealing with her right now. Hey, Malfoy! It was Malcolm Baddock, the dark-haired chaser. Letter came for you. And he tossed the sealed parchment into Draco's lap. It unrolled with the touch of Draco's hand, and he quickly moved his arm to block it from Malcolm's view. Thanks, Baddock. Malcolm nodded and moved away, and Draco had leisure time to study the missive. He had already guessed what it was and was not disappointed. A finely drawn map, showing the front door of the castle and the route he should take from it to a designated meeting place. At the bottom of the map were inked 3 words in bold lettering. Meet me here. With a sigh, Draco crumpled the map into a ball in his fist and went to get his cloak. Hermione looked over at Harry where he sat in front of the fire in the Gryffindor common room, a copy of The Defeat of the Wizard Grindelwald open on his lap. He hadn't said much of anything to her since she'd come down to the common room to study with him, but she had yet to see him turn a page in the past 2 hours. His eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on the fire, his head bent, his unruly mass of dark hair falling to hide his eyes.
"Harry," she said finally, breaking the silence, "are you even reading that book?"
"No." Harry looked up, impatiently pushing a lock of dark hair out of his eyes as he did so. The light caught and sparked on the gold watch she had given him for his birthday, a pocket watch which he had had set into a band so he could wear it around his wrist.
"I can't seem to concentrate."
He pushed his hair back again. It had grown down to the point where it almost touched his collar and tumbled forward when he bent his head. This gave Hermione an idea.
"I know what you need," she announced.
Harry raised an eyebrow.
"A haircut,"
she said. He almost smiled.
"A haircut?" "That's right."
She got up and crossed the room to where he was sitting, and put her hands to his face and tilted his head up to hers. Gently, she smoothed the long locks of hair back from his eyes, letting the loose, curling ends slip through her fingers.
"Are you sure you want to give me a haircut, or is this just an excuse to play with my hair?"
he asked, but he was smiling now. She could feel his awareness of her suddenly snap into focus, and he shifted in his chair. It was her turn to smile as she held out her wand.
"Accio scissors,"
she said. In a moment, she was holding the embroidery scissors that she kept in her trunk. She picked Harry's book up off his lap and set it down on the table, with her wand on top of it.
"Are you ready?"
she asked.
"I don't,"
Harry began, but snip went the scissors, and he subsided into a meek silence. Hermione tried to cut the hair evenly, but she had to admit she knew nothing about cutting hair, and just hoped she wouldn't lop off an ear or leave a bald spot anywhere. Harry was uncharacteristically quiet, either enjoying the attention or stupefied by boredom, she couldn't tell. She certainly wasn't bored, but rather acutely aware of everywhere she was touching him, her hand steadying him under the chin, her other hand in his hair, his leg between hers, her knee against his thigh. She could smell the faint scent that came off him, the clean, soapy boy smell that was Harry. His green eyes looked up at her, framed by the dark lashes she both envied and loved.
"Here,"
he said suddenly, his voice a little hoarse, as he reached out and put his hands on her waist, drawing her closer. Now she was straddling his legs, his eyes level with her chest. Harry shifted in his chair again.
"Sit still,"
she said, her voice coming out on a squeak. He released her waist and caught at her wrist. The scissors fell out of her hand and bounced harmlessly on the carpet.
"Hermione,"
he said, as he pulled her towards him, and then she was kissing him. She leaned into the kiss with an urgency that was nearly painful, and to her surprise, he opened his mouth under hers, welcoming the kiss, welcoming her touch. Her hands fell from his hair onto his shoulders, then slid to lock around his neck. She felt her knees give, and sat down in his lap, looping her legs over his. The pressure of her chest against his was so tight, she could hear his heartbeat through the thin cotton shirt he wore.
"Hermione."
His voice was rough in her ear, his hands rougher on her back. He set his mouth to her cheek, the smooth line of her jaw, the sensitive skin of her throat. His fingernails almost raking her skin, he slid his hands to her waist, and then roughly up under her shirt, finding and tracing the lacy edges of her bra. Hermione shivered with feeling, and also with surprise. This wasn't like Harry, to be so aggressive, but in this moment there was only Harry, his fingers on her skin and his mouth on hers, and she overbalanced. With a tiny shriek, she grabbed at Harry and succeeded in pulling him over with her as she toppled off the chair onto the floor. They landed on the carpet in a torrent of gasps and laughter, and it was several moments of tangled legs and arms before Hermione realized that the only one laughing was her. Harry wasn't laughing at all. He was staring down at her with a look of frozen horror on his face, and such a blaze of pain in his eyes that had stopped her laughter dead in its tracks.
"Harry?" she gasped, struggling to sit up. "What's wrong?"
He shook his head, pulling away from her.
"What are we doing? What were you doing?"
"What was I doing?" Hermione stared at him. "I was kissing my boyfriend." Harry looked away from her. "My boyfriend," she said again, and this time there was anger in her voice. "Who barely talks to me anymore. Who won't look at me."
"That's not true," said Harry sharply. "I'm just busy, that's all."
"And I'm not busy? I'm head girl, Harry. I've got extra classes and study groups, and I still have time for you. I have nothing but time for you. But you don't seem to want to spend any time with me."
"Hermione, let it go," Harry said tightly.
His eyes behind his glasses were cold and removed, and his jaw was set in a hard, angry line. He had never looked at her before like that. "Is this about last year?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I know we went through hell, Harry, and I know how awful it was."
"You don't know," he said, and his voice was like the ice that sparkled on the window panes.
"Excuse me?" Hermione said, suddenly angrier than she had ever been up until this moment. "In case it has escaped your notice, I was there too, kidnapped by Slytherin, remember? Forced to drink a love potion. I was tied to those golden pillars too, Harry."
"Stop!"
he shouted. He was sitting with his back against the armchair now, leaning away from her, hair wild and disarranged, flushed from kissing and from anger. His eyes met hers, and for just a moment she felt the old connection spring to life between them, as vibrant and as living thing. Then Harry looked away again, and it was gone.
"I know all that, Hermione. Just please, I'm asking you to let this alone."
"No," she said defiantly. "I won't do that."
"Then we have nothing to say to each other," he said, and got to his feet.
Hermione looked at him in disbelief. "Harry, just leave me alone!" he shouted, and the shock of Harry actually shouting at her stunned her into silence. She sat where she was, not moving, as he grabbed his cloak off the back of his chair and stalked out through the portrait hole. Harry barely registered his surroundings as he flung himself down the stairs, through the darkened hallways and the front doors of the school. There was too much unreasonable rage, born out of a pain so inarticulate and blinding that it might as well have been physical. His hands still tingled with the feeling of Hermione's skin under his, and his mouth still tasted of hers, and he saw the expression in her eyes when she had looked at him from the floor. The cold air hit him like a bludgeon as soon as he stepped outside, and he pulled his cloak tightly around him, but still the bite of it stung his eyes, his mouth. He went down the stairs, and his boots crunched on the snow that had piled there, and had no idea where he was going. The world was beautiful and cold and glittering silver and black, the sky a flawed diamond chased with iron. The edges of the forbidden forest loomed dark and jagged in the distance. Harry wanted to disappear into it, into the cold and the darkness. He wanted to be alone and not have to think or talk to anyone. He did not know when this subtle shift had taken place inside him, but it had. He set off across the snow, which was white and trackless and empty, marked only by shadows. He might have been the only person left alive, making his way in solitude across the skin of a deserted world. When he reached the edge of the forest, he remembered having been here as a first year, terrified, trailing Draco in his wake. They had been 11 then, and it seemed 100 years ago now. He raised his hand to push back a tree branch, and the moonlight caught and glimmered on the watch that banded his wrist. Its gold face, the black numbers, the watch his father had worn until the day he died, and Sirius had taken it off his dead body, and then Hermione had made it work again, for him. He knew by heart what was engraved on the base. For Harry, from Hermione, your best friend.
Hermione.
An arrow of dismay shot through him.
What have I done?
He stopped dead in his tracks and turned to go back to the castle, but his foot caught in a bent of tree root, and he fell forward into the snow. The map led Draco to an old stone wall at the edge of the forbidden forest, in the center of a deserted clearing. A tree had grown up through the center of the wall, splitting the stones apart with its roots. Draco leaned back against its trunk in the shadow of its bare, leafless branches and looked out over the frozen landscape. The sky had darkened to cobalt, marked here and there with a thumbprint of a black cloud. Everywhere the snow stretched white and cold and sparkling, coated with shimmering ice. The lake was an iced-over diamond, softened to a muted blue by the gathering darkness, and in the distance the castle rose, dark and shadowy and ancient, looking as it must have looked 1,000 years ago, when Salazar Slytherin and Godric Gryffindor had lived there as children. Sometimes, looking out of the castle, memories of that other life still came to him, as easily as the memory of a dream. They had been here together for the building of the castle, the two young men, still almost children, riding horses side by side through the dry blue waters of the cornflower fields in summer. Just by touching his hands to the old stone wall, he could hear their boyish voices echo in his head. There was a loud snapping noise overhead, and a girl fell out of the tree and landed on top of him. He tried to get his hands out of his pockets to catch her, but the sound of the branch breaking had startled him and slowed his responses. She fell directly onto him, and they rolled sideways down a slight incline into a snowbank. When they came to a stop, he found familiar gray eyes sparkling down at him with amusement.
"Hello, Draco,"
she said, sitting up.
"Are you all right?"
Draco blinked up at her. She was dressed in a rich dark wool dress, low-necked, with slashed sleeves just visible beneath her violet cloak, which was fastened at her shoulder with a gold pin in the shape of a poppy. There were jewels caught in her hair, emeralds and garnets, and when she moved, they caught the moonlight and glimmered like Christmas lights, an effect that was probably intentional. He sighed. "Rhysson. Yes. Fortunately, I cleverly used my spine to break our fall."
"You don't sound pleased to see me."
"I'm surprised I sound anything. I can't breathe." This was true, as Rhysson was sitting squarely on his ribs. She was light, but his breathing was still constricted. Instead of shifting, she merely pouted.
"Do you want the message I have for you or not?"
she said, but her eyes were glittering, flat gray and amused. The snow was beginning to soak into the back of his cloak. He shivered. "Have I got a choice?"
"Not really."
Rhysson smiled, then slid a hand under her dress, where she produced a rolled-up parchment, tucked neatly into the top of her stocking. She held it up in front of her, then got up off Draco's chest. He stood up, brushing the snow off his cloak as he did. When he looked up, he found himself staring squarely into her eyes. There was nothing girly about her gaze. It was sharp, cold, calculating, ageless. He wondered again how old she really was, something she had never been willing to tell him. Mutely, he reached out for the missive, and she darted forward then and pressed her lips to his cheek and the parchment into his hand. The kiss was like the brush of hot ash against his skin. He shivered.
"I'll see you again before your birthday," she said.
"My birthday is in July."
"That's what you think,"
she said, and disappeared. Draco glared at the spot from which she had vanished. Apparently the rules for apparating on and off Hogwarts grounds didn't seem to apply to her. He looked down gloomily at the letter in his hand. Having become used to the look of these missives from his father, he took in the fine vellum parchment, neatly rolled, tied with a black ribbon, and stamped with the death's head seal. With a gloomy sigh, he prepared himself to open it, when the sound of crackling ice made him glance up in alarm, his gaze searching the half-lit glade, and lighting upon Harry as he pitched forward and went sprawling into the snow. Puzzled, Draco wandered over to him and stared down in amusement. "Hello, Potter," he said gleefully. "Making snow angels, are we? Or just very, very tired?" Harry rolled over onto his back and looked up at the other boy, who was a black silhouette against the sapphire blue sky. "Shut up, Malfoy," he said with feeling. "I fell over." "That much is evident," said Draco, and held out a slender hand, gloved in black suede. "Get up, then." "I don't want to," said Harry mutinously. "You'll freeze," Draco pointed out. Harry laughed bitterly. "So what?" "Ah, the bitter laugh," noted Draco. "That means girl trouble." With that, he flopped down in the snow next to Harry, who lifted his head and propped his chin on his hand, his eyes scanning Draco's expression, which was non-committal. Even after all this time, the subject of Hermione was not one that was entirely comfortable between them. Draco was careful and respectful, and reticent on the topic. This in itself was enough for Harry to know that whatever issues Draco had harbored in regards to Hermione, he still harbored them. Harry suspected that this was what lay behind Draco's estrangement from Ginny, but there was no way to be sure. Whatever it was, Blaise apparently didn't notice, or had convinced herself that it didn't matter. "Yeah," Harry heard himself say with some surprise. "You could say that." Draco's eyebrows went up, but he didn't say anything. "We had a fight," Harry added. Draco remained silent. "Hermione and I," he clarified. "Right. Well, I didn't think you meant Snape." Harry grinned despite himself. This seemed to solidify some resolve of Draco's. He stood up and held out a hand to Harry again. "Come on," he said. "We're going for a walk." This time, Harry took the proffered hand. "Where to?" he asked as he got to his feet. "Hogsmeade." "Hogsmeade? Why?" "We're going to get drunk." "But the Three Broomsticks only has butterbeer. I'm not a house elf." "Just shut up, Potter, and trust me." The moon was rising over Hogsmeade, lighting the picture-pretty village with a silver glow. Snow was heaped and piled like icing sugar on the roofs of the houses, which were strung with magical Christmas lights, flashing emerald and garnet through the snow-spangled air. Smoke curled up in plumes from the chimneys below, tracing the sky with faint markings like streaks of watercolor. The ornate gold "You are now entering Hogsmeade" sign that marked the village outskirts was wreathed, like the rest of the town, in dancing red and green lights. Draco stared at it. "No danger of forgetting it's nearly Christmas in this place." "Christmas," echoed Harry, his tone hollow. He might as well have been talking about some recent ghastly tragedy. "I haven't bought gifts for anyone yet." Draco looked sideways at him. "Do I take this to mean I will not be getting the model train set I asked for?" "And the wedding," Harry continued gloomily. "That's coming up at New Year's, and I haven't gotten them anything either." Draco blinked snow from his eyelashes. "Have you heard from Sirius?" Harry shook his head. "Not much. I think he's busy with preparations." "Any word on the bagpipe situation?" A very faint smile touched the corner of Harry's mouth. "I think that's still a stalemate." "Not for long, if I know my mother," said Draco, but he could tell Harry had stopped listening. He was staring off towards the town, his green eyes dark and remote, his mouth set in a tense, unhappy line. "Oh, bear up, Potter," said Draco. "You look like your owl just died." "Hermione hates me," said Harry, as his hands worked nervously at his belt. Not at the actual material, but at the red circular ornament. too small to be a bracelet, that was looped on like an extra buckle. Draco had noticed it back in September, but had never asked Harry what it was. He seemed very attached to it.
Hates you?
Draco shook his head when Harry didn't elaborate.
I doubt that. Come on,
he said, and grabbed a fistful of Harry's cloak and pulled. Harry followed, without much resistance. They headed down the snowy path into the village, passing warm, lighted windows that smelled of gingerbread and cinnamon. Eventually, they came out into Hogsmeade's small commercial district, bracketed by Zonko's joke shop on one end and the 3 broomsticks on the other, which they entered. As they passed through its doors and into the warm, crowded space inside, Draco said a spell under his breath that melted the snow from their clothes without leaving a puddle. Behind the bar, Madame Rosemerta smiled at the boys.
"Hello, Draco," she said. "Harry?"
Draco nodded at her.
"We're just passing through," he said significantly.
She arched an eyebrow.
"Well, have fun then."
Harry looked at Draco in confusion.
"Malfoy, what? Just come on," said Draco, and transferred his grip from the scruff of Harry's neck to his wrist and pulled him along in his wake.
They crossed the room, half full of witches and wizards sitting and drinking quietly at the long oak tables, then passed by the hugely decorated Christmas tree and under a stairwell, until they fetched up against a wall which was blank, except for a gold-framed painting of a very attractive girl bearing a passing resemblance to Madame Rosemerta herself, perched on a swing. When she caught sight of Harry and Draco, she gave them a coquettish wink.
"Well, aren't you two pretty?" she said. "Come to visit me for a while?"
Draco shook his head, smiling slightly.
"Buttercup,"
he said. The girl in the picture pouted as the portrait swung forward anyway, revealing a blank black entryway, which Draco started off down, and Harry, looking bewildered, followed him into the passageway. An elegant room opened up before them with sparkling teak wood, dark oak, and polished brass. A long bar ran across one wall, and behind it were shelves lined with row after row of liquor bottles: red dragon's blood gin, black giant wine, vicious green troll beer. A tall vodka bottle the height of a man stood to one side of the bar. Inside it, tiny broomsticks whizzed around in circles. The words "Absolute Quidditch" wound in scrollwork across the top. A tall witch stood behind the bar, wearing a shimmering silver top and pouring a thin stream of pink liquid into a glass held by a fat wizard in orange robes, who sat cross-legged at the bar. As Harry's eyes adjusted to the dimness, he realized that the bar seemed to be inhabited solely by wizards. There was not a witch to be seen, except for the girl behind the bar, who did not appear to be wearing a robe, but seemed to be clothed solely in her long, glimmering hair and a pair of gold hot pants.
"Welcome to the Sleazy Weasel,"
said Draco, indicating the bar with a sweep of his arm. Harry took an involuntary step back.
I've never seen."
"Now you have," said Draco, and grabbed the back of Harry's robes again and steered him firmly towards the bar. Finding an empty pair of stools next to the plump wizard with the pink cocktail, he plonked Harry down into a seat and leaned over the counter.
"Oi!" he said. "Drinks over here."
The topless waitress turned around.
"Draco,"
she said, obviously pleased to see him, and hurried over to give him a kiss on the cheek.
"I haven't seen you in ages."
Harry made a gurgling sound.
"You come here a lot?"
"My father used to conduct business deals here," said Draco, accepting the barmaid's kiss with the air of one to whom all homage is due. His eyes flicked expertly down the bar. "Right then, 1 Mai Tai," he said, "with an umbrella, green, and 1—" he glanced over at Harry. "Dragon's blood, neat." The bartending witch grinned. "Umbrella?" "Sure, a red one." She winked at him. "Anything you want? And clever you got here before the show this time." Draco just smiled. "The show?" thought Harry. His eyes darted to the side and lit upon a small stage towards the shadowy end of the room. There were several tall poles set up on it, and far behind them was a small group of wizard musicians. All men as well, and the one with the clarinet looked disturbingly like Snape. Slowly, Harry turned his head towards Draco, who was rummaging in the pockets of his cloak with an air of unconcern. "Malfoy," he said, "did you just take me to a gentleman's club for wizards?" "Yep," said Draco, and tossed a handful of galleons on the counter. "That should hold us for a few rounds." Harry shook his head. "I'll see you toasted on the fires of hell for this, Malfoy." "Did you say toast?" The silver-haired barmaid was back, with a smoking red drink in one hand and a swirling green drink in the other. She set them down in front of Harry and Draco and smiled. "How about toast to the two best-looking boys at Hogwarts?" Despite himself, Harry felt a blush creeping up from his collar. He was not immune to the charms of other girls, but suspected that this one was a Vila. Draco, however, just grinned. "Angelique," he said, "you've never even seen any other boys at Hogwarts." The girl grinned back. "I'm just in it for the tips, love," she said. Draco handed her a galleon, which she tucked carefully away in a place that nearly made Harry fall off his stool. When he righted himself, he made a grab for his drink and drained it handily. It went down about as easily as a pint of gasoline, but even as he choked and sputtered, he could feel the liquid spreading its alert and burning energy through his veins. He gestured weakly with his hand. "Another," he said between coughs. "Another of the same, please." "Buck up, Potter," Draco said some time later, after he downed his fourth drink. "The night is young, and we have umbrellas in our drinks." Harry, who had been sitting hunched over his dragon's blood, turned unfocused green eyes on him. "What is it with you and drink umbrellas?" "Well, there's a good story there. Actually, it's not a good story. It's just a long one. Let's talk about you instead. What were you doing wandering around outside near the Forbidden Forest?" "I told you, I had a fight with Hermione." "And you thought a good sulk in the snow would be a way to cool off, did you?" Harry blew out an exasperated breath. "No, I sort of ran off. Things were getting too intense and—" "Don't you and Blaise ever fight?" Draco snorted. "We don't talk much." Harry gaped at him. "Then why are you with her?" Draco knocked back his drink so fast that Harry was worried for a moment that he was going to topple off his bar stool. He slammed the empty glass down on the counter. "This session isn't about me, Potter. It's about you." Draco idly ran a finger around the cool rim of his glass. "I don't like seeing Hermione unhappy. She says you've been ignoring her, you know, but you barely speak to her anymore." A slow flush spread upward from Harry's collarbone across his face. "It's not bloody true," he said. "Right," said Draco. "Tell me, what classes is she taking?" Harry blinked. "What? What classes is Hermione taking this year?" "Potions," he said slowly. "Advanced DA with Lupin." "And the classes she doesn't have with you?" Harry looked down at the bar top. "Arithmancy," he said, his voice unsure. "Medical magic, wards and protection." "She dropped that in October," said Draco in a hard voice. "She's taking runic studies instead." Harry looked away from him, his jaw muscles set. "Oh, give it up, Potter!" yelled Draco in exasperation. "Is there somebody else?" Harry banged his fist down so hard on the bar that his glasses rattled. "No!" he shouted, "and there never will be anyone else. Not for me, not ever." Draco was conscious of the fat wizard on his right, who was giving them a peculiar look. The dark color had faded from Harry's skin, and now he was very white. "Sorry," he said. "It's not your fault."
Damn right it isn't, said Draco. And don't think I like being a go-between for you and Hermione either, because I don't. At that, Harry was silent. He stared off at the row of bottles lined up against the wall behind the bar. The magical liquors inside swirled with different colors, shades of lavender, turquoise, and lemony gold. Maybe I'm being selfish, he said finally, but it's because I love her, and I don't want to lose her, even if I can't. He paused, and Draco waited, knowing this was no time to interrupt. Even if I can't give her anything right now, he finished. You'll drive her away, said Draco. Harry looked down into his empty glass, the torchlight fringing his black hair with gold and lighting a bright spark of fire at his throat. The abyssalical charm. Might be the best thing for her, he said. Don't be a daft bugger, said Draco firmly. She loves you. The bartender set another drink down in front of Harry, who looked at it out of bleary eyes. Voldemort's coming for me, he said. You know that. Draco leaned back. I don't know any such thing, he said, although in the back of his head a man's voice was saying, The boy is unreliable, master. Of course he is, said Harry, and I'm glad. Draco blinked. Come again? I'm glad, said Harry, and his voice held something savage and primal. His hand was tight around the stem of his glass. I think about it all the time, Malfoy. About confronting him. My chance to get vengeance this time. My chance to avenge my parents. I dream about killing him. I've been angry before, but I've never known hatred like this. It's fierce, constant, and it never leaves me. How can I be around Hermione when I feel like this? If she knew how I was, how full of poison. She thinks I'm above those things, better than that, and I wish I was, but... He shook his head as if clearing it of cobwebs. But I'm not. Draco stared at him. I keep thinking about my parents down there, in that place, Harry said in a ragged breath. Draco spoke through a tightened throat. Did you use the pensive I gave you? Harry shook his head. No, I can't, he said, an alcohol roughening the usual smooth edge of his voice and giving it a wild desperation. I can't bear it. I can't. And he leaned forward and buried his face in his hands. Draco stayed frozen, his heart beating painfully against his ribs. This was his fault. He was the one who had told Harry about his parents in the land of the dead, giving him a tool with which to sharpen all his feelings of loss and rage and despair into a now unbearable point. He had thought the gift of the pensive would help, but it hadn't. Maybe he had been a fool to have thought of it in the first place. He reached out and gently touched Harry's shoulder. Potter, I'm sorry, But Harry had stopped talking and slowly slid off his chair to the ground. Oh, hell, Draco intoned, and was off his chair and kneeling next to Harry in a flash. Putting a hand on Harry's shoulder, he rolled him over. He seemed unharmed and blinked up at Draco with sleepy eyes. Harry, are you all right? Fine, thank you, Professor, said Harry with a smile, and shut his eyes. Draco sighed and sat back on his heels, and only then did he realize that the whole bar was staring at them. Even the scantily clad waitresses were looking at them curiously. Come on, Potter, get up. No, don't fall back down again. Yes, I know, gravity is a harsh mistress, but we have to learn to work with her. Now come along. Just outside Hogwarts' front doors, Hermione and Ginny sat together on the stone steps, both wrapped warmly in fur-lined cloaks. A few flakes of silvery snow were caught in Ginny's scarlet curls, and her dark eyes were wide and anxious as they fixed on her friend. Look, he'll come back, she said, giving Hermione's hand a confirming squeeze. You two hardly ever fight. I know, said Hermione through a tight throat. That's what makes it so awful.
The two lapsed into silence, and Hermione took a moment to study Ginny out of the corner of her eye. She wondered, for the 100th time, what had caused her rift with Draco. They had been quite close when they'd all been at the manor together, and then, quite suddenly, and with no explanation, they were no longer speaking. In fact, unless it was at a Quidditch match, they seemed to try to never be within 100 yards of each other. Ron had been ecstatic, but Harry hadn't seemed to notice that anything was happening at all. Harry. Hermione's heart turned over, and she raised her eyes to the dark tree line in the distance, searching for a familiar dark head and cloak. "Look," said Ginny suddenly, and rose to her feet, her own cloak swirling around her. Hermione squinted where Ginny was looking and saw a vague shape approaching. Ginny sniffed. "He's back. Might have known who he'd go running to." She turned. "I'm going back inside." Hermione caught at her hand. "No, wait." Ginny waited, reluctantly. The dark, approaching shape resolved itself into a clear figure, and Hermione could now see that it was Draco, his silvery hair bright against the dark horizon. But he was not alone. He was carrying Harry, whose cloak stood out against the snow like a dark bruise. Hermione was down the stairs in seconds. In the icy silence of the night, the sound of her feet crushed the iced-over snow, sounding like breaking glass. She reached Draco's side and almost barreled into him in her haste to get near Harry. "What happened? Is he all right?" "He's fine." Draco's eyes were shadowed, his lids touched with silver in the moonlight. "He just drank too much, that's all." "What?" Hermione let her hands drop to her sides. "When were you drinking? Why were you drinking? Is he just passed out, or—" "Well, he woke up briefly," Draco interjected over her protestations. "Called me Professor, and then demanded to be taken to Buckingham Palace because he was late for high tea with the Queen. When I didn't let him run for the train, he became abusive. So I knocked him out, and here we are." Hermione shook her head. "With friends like you, who need severe head injuries, I cannot believe he went out drinking, or that you let him drink that much." Draco looked at her with big eyes. She sighed. "On the other hand, you did carry him all the way here." Draco shrugged. "I couldn't leave him on the floor of the, 3 broomsticks. I did a Legolas spell to make him lighter." "You could have done a Moblia Corpus spell." It was Ginny, who had come to stand behind Hermione. "But I see you'd rather carry him all the way here just to impress us." Hermione stiffened in surprise, and Draco narrowed his eyes as he regarded Ginny. "What a rich and inventive fantasy life you lead, Weasley," he said coldly. "I can only assume that it's because your ordinary life is so colourless and boring." "What a witty retort," Ginny said icily. "Remind me to laugh next time." And she turned on her heel and walked back up the stairs, yanking the heavy front doors open with venomous force before disappearing inside. Hermione turned and looked at Draco. The angry look had disappeared from his face, and there was an odd light in his eyes. Without looking at her, he said, "If you start asking me what happened between Ginny and me, I will bury you up to your ears in snow." "I won't then," she said quietly, "but I'd hedge a guess that it has something to do with Blaise Zabini." Draco said nothing to this, merely made a gesture to hand Harry off to Hermione, who took him by the other arm and slung it over her shoulder. He'd been right. Harry was much lighter with the Legatus spell on him. "Get him inside before your boyfriend freezes to death." Hermione doubted he was in any danger of freezing, and was certain the reason Draco changed the subject was because she had hit a little too close to the mark. "Aren't you going to help me?" she asked. "No," said Draco, taking a step back. "Get Weasley to help you. Have a good night, and don't let him throw up." She knew he meant Ron. Even when he called Ginny Weasley, there was a notable difference in tone when he was referring to her than when he was referring to her brother. "I don't know where he is," she wailed. "I'm sure you can find him," said Draco, and walked past her, taking the stairs up to the front door 2 at a time, the moonlight flashing off the silver embroidery on his cloak, leaving Hermione standing there, staring after him. Ginny was halfway up the stairs to Gryffindor Tower when she heard his voice behind her. "Ginny, wait." Despite herself, she turned around. Draco stood at the foot of the stairs, wrapped in his black cloak. The snow in his hair had melted and made little rivulets down the sides of his face, running into his collar. "What do you want?" she asked wearily. "Just wanted to tell you that I think it would be best if you didn't mention tonight to anyone," he said. Ginny narrowed her eyes. "I already promised along with everyone else that I wouldn't mention that you two were friends, even though the whole school knows you're going to be brothers soon." "I know," Draco said, now sounding a bit defeated. "Don't you think it's a bit stupid to continue with the charade of pretending you don't care about anyone, including Harry?" His eyes narrowed to slits of silver light. "I didn't ask for the situation to be this way, you know." "I don't care what you did or didn't ask for!" Ginny practically shouted. "The whole thing is stupid. You're stupid. The choices you and Harry continue to make in regards to this whole charade is the most childish thing I've ever been forced to witness. And your decision to date Blaze, of all people, in order to keep up some paltry house pride, makes me think that after all we've been through, you haven't changed one bit." She was breathing heavily now, but couldn't seem to stop talking. "When you're finally ready to throw off the chains of traditionalism, come talk to me. Good night, Draco." And she turned around and went up the stairs, and Draco did not follow her. It was near dawn, and the room had begun to fill with light. "The sun's coming up," she said, rolling over in the darkness until her bare shoulder touched his. "We should be getting back." "No." His voice was distant, sleepy. "Let's stay here. Let them find us. Who cares?" "Oh, Ron!" She propped herself up on her elbow and looked down at him. "You know we can't do that." He lay with the sheets tangled around him, red hair pasted against his forehead with sweat. This room was one of the few at Hogwarts that wasn't drafty in the winter. "I know," he said, and pulled her down so that she lay crosswise on top of him and kissed her mouth. "Nobody can know about this," she said urgently. "About us." "Yeah, I'll know." His lips found her throat. "I don't like lying, though." "It's just for now," she said, her voice a little hoarse. Her resolve had begun to weaken, and she found herself leaning into his kisses. When he stopped, she made a disappointed noise and looked down at him beseechingly. His blue eyes laughed up at hers. "I thought we had to get back," he said. "Well," she whispered, "maybe not quite yet." And she let him pull her down into his arms. I don't know, I'm afraid I accidentally got in line for Shred of Moral Decency instead, is from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Fortunately, I cleverly used my sprine to break our fall is from Blackadder. The night is young and we have umbrellas in our drinks is from The Tick. And that is it for this chapter. It's gonna be long ones from here out, guys, so thank you so much for joining me. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel, share, I guess. I don't know why people say that, actually. But again, if you enjoy what you are hearing, do all the things, follow me here. And if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, I do have a Patreon where I release some pop culture hot take videos every month, or at least until I run out of things to say, and as well as my spicy art content and NSFW art for my higher tiers. But if Patreon is not your thing, I also have a Ko-fi as well. Both are linked in my About section here on YouTube. And as always, I will see you all in the next one. Good night.